You walk past a wall and have no idea that inside are human remains, a road that leads to the sea and disappears. You open a book and there is real hair in the binding, pyramids inside a person. This is not the kind of story they tell you in school. This is a story we prefer not to know, but it's beneath our feet and it concerns us. Hello, my friend. You're on the Kurtop channel. The Pit of the Headless. In Slovakia, archaeologists uncovered a burial site over 7,000 years old. Almost 40 bodies. All but one are missing their skulls. The bodies are neatly arranged with no signs of violence or chaos. Everything feels too calm, as if someone acted deliberately and followed a plan. Only one child's head was preserved. No one understands why. Maybe the child was spared, or maybe left as a sign. There are theories about a ritual or an execution. Or perhaps it was an effort to erase someone so thoroughly that even their appearance vanished. Bones in the wall? At first I thought it was fake, but seriously, who would find bones in their own wall these days? But the story is real. England. A woman is renovating her house. She opens up the wall, and there, among the old plaster and bricks, are real human bones. A skull. Vertebrae. The police arrive and confirm it. These are indeed human remains, real ones, from around the 19th century, but the exact age hasn't been determined yet. And this is where it starts to feel a bit unsettling, because you realize between ordinary life and death, there's literally just a layer of wallpaper. Everything we're used to thinking of as the past isn't somewhere underground anymore. It's right here, inside the house. I don't know how those bones ended up in the wall. Maybe it was a crime, maybe an old burial ritual, but the fact remains. In a real house where someone lived, ate, and slept, human remains were found behind the wall. A child with a lock on their leg. Poland, the village of Penn. 17th century archaeologists are exploring an abandoned cemetery and find a child's skeleton. The age is about 5 to 7 years old. The body is lying face down. There's a massive padlock on the leg, old, made of iron. Not everyone was buried like this. Only those who were feared. Could people in ancient times really be afraid of a child? In folk beliefs, it was thought that a body buried face down would not be able to rise. And the lock was a kind of magical seal, so that the soul wouldn't leave, wouldn't return, and wouldn't cause harm. Nearby, there's another well-known burial of a dead witch, a woman with a sickle placed on her neck, so that if she tried to rise, she would decapitate herself. This child most likely is also a victim of such traditions. A tomb that no one was looking for. In Saqqara, right next to the pyramid of Userkaf, they found a small tomb. It was squeezed between other structures. No paintings, no bas-reliefs, just a limestone sarcophagus, a few vessels, and a plaque with a name. According to the inscription, this is the son of a pharaoh, but everything around says otherwise. The burial is not marked, it can't be seen from the outside. And even the workers, who have been digging here for decades, had never heard of it. It feels like he wasn't just buried, but erased, as if something didn't go according to plan, as if he died at the wrong time, not for the right reasons, or maybe he wasn't who he was supposed to be. No obvious traces, but the very lack of attention is itself a clue. Discoveries like this are remembered not for who's buried, but because people tried to avoid them. A book with human hair. When you hear the phrase, a book made of human hair, the first thing that comes to mind is fiction, something out of cheap horror. But then you see a photo and you stop being surprised. These books really do exist. France, 14th to 15th century medieval monasteries where manuscripts were bound into booklets, sewn from something that at first seems like leather. And then you realize it's hair, real, long, light-colored human hair. For a long time, scientists couldn't explain why this was done at all. Only recently have more or less clear hypotheses appeared. It turned out the hair didn't just end up there by accident. It was sewn in deliberately, as a material, as a symbol. Perhaps these were reliquaries, personal items. People would place a lock of hair in a book to remember the deceased as a vow, for repentance, or as protection, since hair was thought to carry the soul. In one case, a prayer book contained not just a single lock, but an entire layer of hair between its pages, dense and sewn together with the text. And for someone, this book could have been the only connection to a deceased person, or to themselves. Now imagine you're in a library, you pull out an old volume, and it's alive. Not in a figurative sense, but literally. When knowledge and memory are bound together not by ink, but by a human being. The bloody prints of the Kyoto castles. There is one strange detail in 16th century Japanese castles that tourists rarely notice. On some wooden floors there are dark stains. They're neither paint nor patterns. These are actual imprints of human bodies left after samurai suicides, and they are still visible to this day. Such marks remain, for example, in Fushimi Castle, not far from Kyoto. In 1600, during one of the sieges, several dozen samurai took their own lives to avoid being captured. Their blood soaked into the wood, and then the panels with their silhouettes were removed and transferred to other temples as a tribute to the fallen. Now this is called Yurei Ito, the cursed boards. Officially, nothing mystical, just a memory absorbed into the floor. Photos show outlines of bodies with contours of hands, heads, and hips imprinted, as if people lay down and disappeared, leaving behind only a shadow. The little guardian of the miners. Until the end of the 20th century, miners didn't go underground alone. With them, in a cage or on their shoulder, was a canary, not as a talisman, but as a signal. The birds sensed dangerous gas before a person did. When it stopped singing, started fluttering around, or lost consciousness, it meant it was time to go up immediately. Sometimes people had no other warning. In Britain, these birds were officially used until 1986. In other countries, even longer. It was a simple but reliable way to survive. And in mining culture, it became deeply rooted. A small living creature that goes silent first, and by doing so, saves others. Tyrannosaurus bag. British scientists, together with designers, have created a material that imitates the skin of a Tyrannosaurus. It's not just a reptile-like texture. They tried to recreate exactly the structure that dinosaurs might have had 66 million years ago. The basis was fossilized imprints of scales. Preserved on fossilized traces, they studied the micro-relief, density, and arrangement of the cells. Then they applied the data to a 3D model. They added reconstructed coloring and prepared material samples. All this was done as part of an exhibition dedicated to extinct species. But the topic quickly went beyond the scientific field. One of the British brands presented a concept, a bag made of artificial Tyrannosaurus leather. Of course, it wasn't actually for sale, but the idea itself caused a stir. This is essentially an attempt not just to show a dinosaur, but to make it tangible, to turn an extinct predator into something you can hold in your hands. No one is planning to sew anything from real remains, but the idea itself is unexpected. A treasure found on a walk. In Britain, a man went for a walk with a metal detector. He just wanted to check out a field where something Roman had been found before. He expected to find at most some fragments, but instead, he found one of the largest coin hoards in recent years, nearly 1,500 bronze coins from the time of Roman Britain, 3rd to 4th century AD. Many of them have portraits of emperors, inscriptions, and symbols. Their condition is surprisingly good. Almost all are clean, not burnt, and show no signs of damage. They lay in the ground as if they had been placed there just yesterday. Interestingly, there was no building or trace of a burial nearby. The coins were simply in the ground, as if someone had set them aside for later and never came back. The man did the right thing. He reported the find and called the archaeologists. The treasure was documented and handed over to the museum. He received a payment, but the main thing here isn't the money. The main thing is how thin the line is between everyday life and history. Sometimes simply walking across a field is enough to pull something from the ground that has been silent for centuries. Gladiator and lion. In Britain, on the site of an ancient Roman settlement, archaeologists discovered a human skeleton with unusual injuries. The man was about 20 to 25 years old, and the cause of death was bite marks that leave no doubt. He was mauled by a large predator, most likely a lion. The wounds were distinctive, deep punctures from fangs on the thighs, tears in the soft tissues, claw marks. This wasn't a hunt or an attack in the wild. All the evidence suggests the man died in the arena. He was a gladiator, and he was sent out against an animal he had no chance against. Such finds are rare. Usually only scraps of information remain about a gladiator, inscriptions, stories, images. But here we have the man himself, his bones, his last fight. Everything that could be reconstructed has been reconstructed. His height, age, probable nationality. But his name is unknown. No plaque, no sign, only the body that speaks for itself. This place was discovered twice. In the south of Cyprus, archaeologists discovered the remains of an ancient sanctuary, a small building, stone foundations, traces of cult activity, and at first glance, nothing unusual. Many such places have been found, but this time there was one catch. This sanctuary had already been discovered many years ago, and then forgotten. The documentation about it was lost. It wasn't included on the map of active sites. There was no security, no signs, no excavations, and now it has been rediscovered and started again. They began to study it. Inside, there's an altar, remains of burnt offerings, fragments of figurines. Everything points to a local cult. Most likely, it was dedicated to a fertility goddess or local spirit. Nothing grandiose. Yet everything is arranged precisely and calmly, showing the place's importance. A child buried like a chieftain. In a cave in Thailand, archaeologists discovered a burial that's almost 30,000 years old. The child was about 4 years old. At first glance, nothing unusual. Children's burials are not uncommon, but this particular one raised many questions. The child's body was placed in a hollow, carved right into the rock, carefully shaped like a cradle. The face and chest were covered with red ochre, a pigment that, in many ancient cultures, was associated with blood, birth, and the transition between worlds. There were objects nearby, stone tools, shells, and ornaments. This is not just a random collection. This is a set of items most often found in the burials of chiefs, shamans, or people of special status, and certainly not in the burial of a child. The scientists did not find any traces of a mass burial or a settlement in the cave. Only one grave, one child, and an entire ritual assembled around him. This made them wonder who he was. Why was he buried this way? There is a theory that this was an expression of an early religious tradition, or it could be a sign that children in that society were not seen as weak and helpless, but as bearers of something important. But there is another thought. Maybe he was the only child in the group, or he died in a special way, in his sleep, during a ritual, or in the course of a ceremony. And then his death gained significance, not because he was a leader, but because he became a symbol. In any case, this burial site is not just archaeology. It is one of the oldest reminders that death, even at a very early age, could be the occasion for a ritual, and a ritual that was complex, deliberate, with details that have survived to this day. Priestess from Peru. Archaeologists in Peru found the burial site of a woman that is over 1,000 years old. She was lying in a grave surrounded by important items, vessels, jewelry, fragments of fabrics. These items indicate her high status. Most likely she was a priestess. The burial was arranged with attention to detail. Her body was carefully laid out, and around her were objects related to rituals or worship. They helped preserve her memory and status even after death. This is not just a grave, it's a sign of respect and reverence. Interestingly, despite its age, this find is quite well preserved. The fabric, the jewelry, even the bones, everything is in good condition. The sand and dryness help preserve details that usually disappear over centuries. 100 years underground. In the Czech Republic, archaeologists discovered an unusual treasure, which turned out not to be ancient, but quite recent. It's only about 100 years old. A gold treasure was discovered in a village, hidden in the early 20th century. Some coins and jewelry are from a period later than the Middle Ages. The treasure was found in an old building that once belonged to a family engaged in trade. When World War I began, their business collapsed, and the money was apparently hidden to wait out the hard times. But they never returned, leaving their treasure in an inaccessible place. Part of the gold apparently was collected from several sources: coins from different countries, jewelry, rare metals. This treasure is interesting not only because of its value, but also because of the story behind it. It reminds us how people try to preserve their wealth when the world around them is falling apart. Many of these items are now displayed in museums, and the treasure symbolizes lost hopes and destinies. Why was this road flooded? On the coast of Israel, archaeologists found an unusual road that was flooded many years ago. This section, which was recently studied, was part of an ancient trade route that was used back in antiquity. The road passed through several settlements and led to the port, but for some reason it was flooded. The mystery of this discovery is that its surfaces are much better preserved than expected for objects thousands of years old. The stone slabs that were used for paving have hardly been damaged, which makes scientists think about the technology that was used in its construction. However, the puzzle that baffles people is that no one knows for sure why the road was flooded. Some suggest that it was the result of an earthquake, while others think that water could have come in due to changes in climate or the sea. All of this remains an open question, and research is ongoing. Countries that do not exist. Some countries have no army, no recognition, not even clear borders, but they have a flag and an anthem. And there are people who call it their homeland. So-called self-proclaimed states appear all over the world, without negotiations, without consent. Someone just declares independence one day and considers it a fact. In 1977, an American named Kevin Boss declared that his plot of land in Nevada was now the Republic of Molossia. He issued his own passports, created a coat of arms, made up laws, and declared himself president. No country recognized this, but Molossia still exists to this day. It has a website, a flag, and they even print their own currency. A similar story happened with Sealand. This country is located on a former sea platform in the North Sea. They occupied it, raised a flag, and declared it a state. Legally, it's just a metal structure, but it has a prince and a website. Other examples sound even stranger. Somewhere, a republic is proclaimed from a single apartment. Somewhere else, a micro-empire consists of 2 tents in the desert. And in another place, a state founded by children unexpectedly lasted for several years. Some projects are jokes, others are serious attempts to be heard in a world where many lack a voice. And almost always, it's a protest against borders, history, and others' decisions. Signals from another planet. The James Webb Telescope detected signs of substances in the atmosphere of exoplanet K1218b that, on Earth, are produced only by living organisms. We're talking primarily about dimethyl sulfide. It is released into the air by seaweed and microorganisms. The planet is located 124 light-years away from us, in the habitable zone. It has an atmosphere with methane and carbon dioxide, which means that water clouds and liquid water are possible there. All this makes K1218bi the first truly confirmed candidate for a potentially habitable planet outside the solar system. Scientists claim that this is not yet the discovery of life, but only a strong chemical trace that may indicate it. The next step is additional observation to confirm or refute the hypothesis. But the very fact itself is groundbreaking, because for the first time we have received a signal that really looks biological. And it came from deep space, not from science fiction, not from assumptions, but from a specific atmosphere that we observe in real time. A complete scan of the Titanic. For the first time in history, a complete digital 3D scan of the Titanic has been made. Hundreds of thousands of images were combined into a model that allows you to examine every inch of the sunken liner. The scan revealed many previously inaccessible details: destroyed decks, personal belongings, and individual structural elements. Experts paid special attention to the stern, the portholes, and the site where the hull broke apart. They discovered, for example, that one of the portholes matched exactly with eyewitness accounts describing the moment of the collision with the iceberg. The model also confirmed something important. Until the very end, the engineering compartment continued to supply electricity. This allowed the lights to stay on longer and gave passengers more time to evacuate. This matches the stories about how the lights on the ship stayed on until the very end. The scan provides more than just an image. It's a tool that lets us study the Titanic as if it were on land instead of the ocean floor. There's something especially strange about seeing something lost so clearly. People were collecting bones. In Siberia, near an ancient settlement, archaeologists have found clusters of mammoth bones for decades. Initially, they believed it was a natural graveyard. They thought that the animals died near bodies of water, and their remains gradually accumulated in one place. But when scientists began to carefully study how the bones were arranged, everything changed. The bones were not lying chaotically. They were gathered, rearranged, and compacted in layers. Some were clearly burned. Many had traces of tools, notches, and fractures. All of this pointed to one thing. This was not a natural death. This was evidence of human activity. A new theory emerged. People of the late Paleolithic didn't just hunt. They collected mammoth bones in one place, as if they were creating a stockpile. Something like a prehistoric warehouse. These bones were used as fuel. They don't burn well, but it's better. Better than nothing. Large bones were used for building, while smaller ones became tools or trade items. This alters our view, as we often see them as nomads, always moving. But here, there's strategy, resource planning. Not just a random catch, it's a system where even the death of an animal was turned into building material. All of this isn't an isolated case, but part of a chain. Similar deposits have turned up elsewhere. Maybe we've long overlooked that what we see is not nature's chaos, but ancient human handiwork.
Okay.
Artifacts that shouldn't be here. In the south of Israel, archaeologists excavated a site that, at first glance, didn't seem remarkable. But everything changed when they began to study the objects they found. In the ground, they found clay vessels and bronze items, whose style doesn't match the local cultural tradition. The ornaments, shapes, and alloy composition were more similar to artifacts found in other Middle Eastern regions and beyond. There was no temple or permanent settlement nearby, only fragments that appeared to be brought here intentionally. It gives the impression that this place was used for rituals or temporary gatherings, possibly by nomadic tribes who had connections with distant cultures. Officially, the items are considered atypical for the region, but questions remain. Who brought them, why, and why exactly here? For now, these are just hypotheses, but the discovery doesn't fit the usual picture of the desert's history. Lions guarding the silence. On the Greek island of Delos stands one of the most recognizable ancient compositions, the Terrace of the Lions, a row of marble lions lined up facing the sacred lake where, according to legend, Apollo was born. Originally, there were 16 of them, but only 5 have survived to this day. The rest were destroyed or moved to museums. Replicas on the terrace preserve the spirit of the place. The lions are not just decoration. They serve as guardians, a symbolic protection of the sacred space, and essentially a demonstration that the divine begins here. The ancient Greeks used this to mark the line between ordinary and sacred. Today, it's among the most photographed spots on Delos. But if you look a little closer, you can see that the lions are not about strength, but about silence and the boundary. And this boundary has lasted for 2,500 years. A paradise that never existed. There is a popular belief that before agriculture, people lived in some kind of golden age. Supposedly, hunter-gatherers found food easily. They worked just 2 hours daily, spent the rest resting, and lived in harmony with nature. It sounds pleasant, but archaeology disagrees. First of all, the average life expectancy in those times was about 30 to 35 years. The causes of death were disease, injuries, and hunger. The skeletons of primitive people often show signs of malnutrition, deformities from constant physical labor, broken bones, and traces of infection. Secondly, obtaining food took much more time than is commonly believed. It was a constant risk. Hunting could end up with nothing. Gathering depended on the season. People weren't strolling. They were looking for food and trying to survive. Sure, there were no taxes, modern wars, or alarm clocks, but that didn't make it paradise. It was a struggle every day with no guarantee for tomorrow. It was agriculture with all its drawbacks that gave rise to civilization. People began to live longer. Surpluses appeared, cities emerged, and written knowledge developed. Not immediately, not everywhere, but the direction was set. So the idea of a primitive paradise is more of a pretty picture. But the real story is more complex, tougher, and more interesting. The Man of the Hole. In Brazil, he was simply called the Man of the Hole, the last survivor of a destroyed tribe. He lived for 26 years in complete solitude, avoiding contact and never speaking to outsiders. He dug deep traps in the ground, either for hunting or for shelter. That's where his nickname comes from. His people were killed by farmers back in the 1990s. After that, he disappeared. He went into the forest and never came out again. The government protected his territory, 8,000 hectares under protection. They left him tools and food, but he rejected almost everything. Once, he even shot an arrow at an employee who came too close. In 2022, he was found dead in a hammock. A feather ornament was lying nearby. There was no violence. Apparently, he knew he was dying and passed away peacefully. He left no words or stories, only traces, but his silence is also a voice, a very loud one. Pyramids inside a person. In Turkey, a man was brought to the hospital with a suspected infection, but during the ultrasound, the doctor saw something no one expected. There were 6 huge stones of perfectly regular shape in his bladder. One of them was a cube measuring 7 by 7 by 7 centimeters. The total weight was over 2 kilograms. All of this was inside him. At the same time, the patient did not feel any pain. It was later discovered that he had undergone surgery as a child, after which his bladder became enlarged. The stones formed slowly over the years, and they took on an almost perfect geometric shape. This is one of the strangest urological cases in history. Everything was removed surgically, but the cube remained in the archive. Lucky amulet. Sometimes archaeology finds more than just an artifact. In Britain, at the site of an ancient settlement from the Roman Empire era, archaeologists pulled a bronze figurine out of the ground. Small, rough, almost primitive. At first glance, it's just a piece of metal, but the shape is immediately recognizable. It's a phallus, a typical Roman amulet. Though it causes laughter today, in ancient times it was seen as a powerful form of protection. Such pendants were worn around the neck, attached to belts, fastened to carriages, and even hung over children's cribs. The phallus was not seen as vulgar. It was a talisman symbolizing strength, life, luck, and protection from the evil eye and misfortune. The find is small, no gold, no carvings, no inscriptions, just bronze worn by time. But that's its strength because the amulet was clearly used. It was worn, fiddled with in the hands, maybe even lost. Maybe it belonged to a soldier, or a merchant, or a child. Someone believed that this little thing would keep trouble away. And now, 2,000 years later, it's back in the light. Maybe it didn't work, who knows? It outlived its owner, the empire, the era.
Все, кроме своей формы.
A road underwater. When you dive in the area of the Hawaiian Islands, you expect to see many things. Lava, craters, rare corals, but not a road, and certainly not one like this. At depth near an underwater volcano, divers noticed a strange area. Perfectly straight yellow stone slabs laid out in a row. The surface looks like a sidewalk. The structure is like masonry. The angles between the slabs are too precise to be random. All of this looked less like a geological formation and more like the trace of something artificial. It spread across the internet. The comments were the usual: Atlantis, ancient road, aliens. But even the researchers themselves were puzzled. They didn't find any signs of human intervention at the site, but they also couldn't immediately explain its origin. Later, geologists got involved. According to their theory, this is the result of volcanic activity. Basaltic lava, which cooled quickly and cracked under the pressure of water, created polygonal fractures. The structure that we perceive as a road is actually a natural formation, but the way it looks is confusing. It's recognizable. We're used to nature creating chaos, but here there's order. You look at these slabs and can't shake the feeling that someone has already been here. Not you first, not slaves, but someone. Maybe it's just an optical illusion or an effect of shapes. But there's a point where science gives you an answer, and yet you still keep doubting. Picasso's dish, an ordinary secondhand store in Belgium. A shelf with dishes, dusty plates, cups, old glassware, and suddenly a ceramic dish. A piecework job. On the back there's an inscription, Imprento Original de Picasso. At first they thought it was a joke or a replica, but we decided to check, and the examination confirmed it. They had an original, an authentic work by Pablo Picasso, 1953. One of the ceramic prints he made in France as part of a series, but still a rare one. How it ended up in a second-hand shop is unknown. Maybe it was lost, forgotten, or thrown away. Maybe someone didn't know what they were holding, or they knew, but didn't care anymore. The plate was sold at auction, 12,600 euros. But the amount isn't the main thing. The main thing is the effect. It's like finding an autograph in an old textbook or the original of a letter in a box of scrap paper. Such finds are always startling because they destroy the main myth. That value is found where it's expected. Sometimes art sits on a shelf among trash and waits for decades until someone takes a closer look. The Lord of the Forest. In the Waipua tropical forest in northern New Zealand, there is a tree that's hard to miss. It's over 50 meters tall. The diameter is almost 10 meters. It's about 1,500 years old. The locals call it Tene Mahuta. This is the name of the god of the forest and light in Maori myths. According to legend, it was Tane who separated the sky and the earth so that the world could appear between them. But this is not a mythical creature. This is a real tree. Kori is an ancient species that has survived since the medieval period. Today there are very few of them left, and Tane is the largest of them all. A wooden path leads to it. With the microphones, everything is quiet. You approach, and at first it just seems like a big tree. But when you linger, you understand its scale. Not physically, but in terms of time. It was growing when there was no writing, no architecture, no maps. And it keeps growing. Tane has survived storms and epidemic deforestation and oblivion. Now it is protected. They fence off its roots and treat it for fungi. It's old but alive, and that's a bit disorienting, because we're used to thinking that ancient means stone, skulls, or ruins, but here it's green, moist, and growing. No one ever buried it. Silver Valkyrie. In the Danish village of Horby, during a routine archaeological survey, they found a figurine, a small one, only 3.5 centimeters made of silver. But it's clear right away it's not accidental. A woman with a sword. In one hand, a round shield, the other stretched down. A dress with fine folds, hair tied in a knot. Her face is intent. Not a deity, not jewelry, not a toy. She is armed. The find is dated to around the year 800. Found in Scandinavia. At first, scientists thought it was a mythical Valkyrie, a messenger of the gods. But then other versions began to appear. Maybe it's not a spirit at all, but a person. In Viking sagas, women who fought are mentioned. They were skalds, warriors, seers. Some burials with weapons really did belong to women, as confirmed by DNA analyses. The figurine could have been part of a ritual staff or a personal talisman or a depiction of a specific woman, someone who was respected and feared. In any case, it's a powerful image. An armed woman in the Viking Age is not a work of fiction. It's reality, just long hidden under layers of convenient assumptions. She says nothing, but her posture, her shield, her sword have already said it all. Sometimes it seems like all of this is just facts. Bones, stones, buildings, chemical formulas in the atmosphere of a distant planet. But the longer you look, the more clearly you understand. All of this is about us, about fear, about memory, about loneliness, about what we do. Archaeology doesn't tell us what history was like. It shows that it existed in time, and each layer has its own face. Thank you for watching this video until the end. Goodbye, everyone.